What started as 13 coastal states was rapidly becoming a nation stretching toward the distant Pacific. This was an age filled with curiosity, a belief in progress, and the idea that a young country could define its own future. Let's explore the era of expansion. After the massive Louisiana Purchase, a great westward migration began. Families, explorers, and entrepreneurs packed their lives into wagons and set off beyond the Mississippi River. They traveled by horseback and riverboat, all seeking new opportunities on fertile land. Along the trade routes, small settlements sprang up, slowly growing into bustling communities. But this expansion was a story of two sides. While settlers celebrated achievements, they also faced harsh weather, isolation, and incredible uncertainty. For the indigenous nations whose homelands these were, the arrival of new populations brought immense pressure and displacement. The government tried to establish treaties, but these agreements were often broken, creating a complex legacy that we still reflect on today. As the nation grew, so did innovation. New technologies started to reshape everyday life and connect a vast country. The Erie Canal, a massive engineering feat completed in 1825, linked the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. Suddenly, New York became a global trading hub, and farmers in the Midwest could send their crops to markets hundreds of miles away. The steam engine revolutionized travel, with riverboats chugging along major waterways and the first railways beginning to crisscross the landscape, promising even faster movement. Communication also improved, with the printing press spreading ideas and a growing postal system connecting citizens from Maine to Georgia. What were once isolated communities were now linked by trade, information, and a shared purpose. This spirit of change wasn't just about land and technology. It was also about ideas. The arts, literature, and education began to flourish. Writers like Washington, Irving, and James Fenimore Cooper captured the American imagination with stories set in the nation's stunning landscapes. Schools and libraries became more common as the idea of public education gained ground, seen as essential for a free society. Social movements also began to take shape, with citizens debating how to build a better world through fairness and civic duty. Politically, this era was a time of growing confidence. This led to a period of optimism, often called the era of good feelings. Under President James Monroe, the country enjoyed relative political harmony. In 1823, he introduced the Monroe Doctrine, boldly declaring that the Americas were no longer open to European colonization. It was a clear signal of the United States' growing maturity on the world stage. Voting rights expanded, and political campaigns began focusing on the opinions of ordinary people. The presidency of Andrew Jackson, beginning in 1829, heralded what became known as Jacksonian democracy, the belief that the government should represent the will of the majority. But this era was far from perfect. Debates over economic policy and the forced relocation of native communities, like the Indian Removal Act of 1830, created deep divisions and left a solemn chapter in the nation's history. Despite these challenges, the horizon continued to expand. Inventions like the telegraph, mechanical reapers, and new textile machines transformed work and life. Cities like Cincinnati, St. Louis, and Chicago boomed as centers of trade. Immigration from Europe brought new skills, cultures, and energy, adding to the rich and diverse fabric of American society. By the 1840s, the idea of progress was woven into America's identity, a feeling that anything was possible in this wide and growing country. The era of expansion was about more than just new territory. It was a mindset, It was the belief that the future could be shaped by effort, imagination, and persistence. The United States was a nation in motion, discovering both its immense possibilities and its profound responsibilities. It was a time of balancing progress with principle, a lesson that would guide the nation for generations to come. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States was a nation of contrasts. It had exploded from a handful of coastal states into a continental power, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Cities pulsed with energy, factories hummed with new inventions, and railroads stitched the vast landscape together. It was an age of incredible progress, but beneath this shiny surface, a deep and dangerous crack was forming, a crack that would soon threaten to split the country in two. This was a nation being transformed. The Industrial Revolution had arrived, bringing with it telegraph lines that sent messages in moments, not days, and canals that floated crops to markets hundreds of miles away. But this wave of change didn't touch every part of the country equally. It created two very different Americas. In the North, life was increasingly urban, driven by industry, trade, and a constant flow of new immigrants. The South, however, remained overwhelmingly agricultural. Its economy and culture built around large plantations powered by the labor of enslaved people. These weren't just economic differences. They were competing visions for the future of a nation. And with every new piece of land America acquired in its westward expansion, one question echoed louder than any other. Would this new territory be free, or would it permit slavery? What was once a regional issue had become a national crisis. In the halls of Congress, fiery debates erupted. Compromises were struck, like the Missouri Compromise and later the Compromise of 1850. But they were like bandages on a deep wound. They covered the problem, but never truly healed it. From this tense atmosphere, powerful voices for change emerged. Frederick Douglass, a man who had escaped the bonds of slavery, became a brilliant orator, his words demanding freedom and equality for all. Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, became a phenomenon, opening the eyes and hearts of millions in the North to the human cost of slavery. This wasn't just about abolition. Movements for education, reform, temperance, and women's rights also gained ground, all part of a larger struggle to make America live up to its founding ideals. Meanwhile, the country's identity was also being shaped by new arrivals. People from Ireland, Germany, and beyond flocked to America's shores, seeking opportunity and a fresh start. They enriched the nation's culture, but their arrival also brought new social tensions, as cities struggled to cope with rapid growth. All the while, the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that America was destined to expand across the continent, fueled ambition and exploration. But it was a dream that came at a great cost, displacing indigenous peoples and raising difficult questions about justice. As these moral and regional divides grew, the political system began to buckle. Old parties fractured and new ones arose, each offering a different path forward. Then, in the 1850s, the situation reached a boiling point. The Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed settlers to vote on slavery. And the result was chaos and violence, a bloody preview of the conflict to come, known as Bleeding Kansas. Then, in 1857, the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision delivered a stunning blow. It declared that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, were not citizens and had no rights under the Constitution. The ruling shattered any remaining trust between North and South. By the end of the decade, the nation was on a knife's edge. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, a thoughtful lawyer from Illinois who opposed the expansion of slavery, was elected president. For many in the South, his victory was the final straw. The sense of unity that had held the country together for over 70 years was about to break. Decades of growth and progress had built a powerful nation, but its very foundation was cracking under the weight of an unresolved contradiction. The storm that had been gathering for so long was finally about to unleash its fury. And in doing so, it would test the United States like never before and ultimately redefine the very meaning of freedom in America. Today, we're diving into one of the most defining moments in the nation's story, the 1860s. A time when the very soul of the United States was put to the ultimate test. Imagine a storm that had been gathering for decades, finally breaking. That is what happened following the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Fearing their way of life was under threat, several southern states decided to leave the Union. In response, President Lincoln made his purpose clear: not to punish, but to preserve the nation and uphold the Constitution. Suddenly, the country was split. Families, friends, and communities found themselves on opposing sides. The great American experiment, which had held for over 80 years, was hanging by a thread. From 1861, the nation plunged into years of incredible hardship. Lincoln's government faced the immense challenge of keeping the country together while battling deep internal division. Across the land, ordinary citizens stepped up, contributing through their labor, their care, and their innovation. The entire population felt the strain, but also a shared sense of responsibility. The conflict wasn't just fought on battlefields. It was a battle of ideas. Leaders and thinkers debated the true meaning of liberty and equality. What started as a political dispute evolved into a profound moral question. Could a nation founded on freedom remain divided over basic human rights? A major turning point came in 1863 with Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that enslaved people in the rebelling areas were to be free. While its immediate impact was limited, it fundamentally transformed the conflict. The struggle was now undeniably linked to the cause of human equality and the founding ideal that all men are created equal. Thousands of formerly enslaved people courageously joined the Union effort, adding their strength and knowledge to the cause. This act didn't just change the nation's future. It redefined its moral identity. The human cost of these years was staggering. Loss and uncertainty touched families in every corner of the country, north and south. Yet, amid the hardship, incredible acts of compassion and perseverance shone through. Nurses, teachers, and community leaders worked tirelessly to bring comfort and care to those in need. Carrying the immense weight of leadership, Lincoln spoke at Gettysburg, not of victory, but of a higher purpose. He called for a new birth of freedom, so that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. His words echoed the spirit of the Revolution, reminding everyone that America was an ongoing project in the pursuit of justice. By 1865, the Union was preserved, but the cost had been immense. The next great task was to rebuild a broken country. The era of Reconstruction aimed to reunite the states and secure freedom under law. It was a time of both physical and moral rebuilding. Schools were established, new laws were passed, and communities worked to shape a fairer society. However, progress was slow and difficult. New challenges arose over how to truly implement justice and equality for all. Once again, the nation's ideals required patience, courage, and dialogue. Through it all, the United States endured. The Constitution held firm, strengthened by the trials it had faced. The nation that emerged was more self-aware, forever changed, but also more committed to its founding principles. It had proven that a democracy could survive its greatest challenge. Not by being perfect, but through persistence and the willingness to renew itself. By the late 1860s, a new age of invention and growth was dawning. Railroads connected the continent, and cities boomed. But the core lesson of those difficult years remained clear. A republic's strength lies in its faithfulness to its ideals. The American journey, from its revolutionary beginnings to the trials of division, stands as a powerful story of perseverance, testament to the enduring idea of liberty. As the 19th century drew to a close, a renewed United States stood on the horizon. It had navigated trials few nations had ever faced, from daring exploration and vast expansion to a bitter division and a painful rebirth. Yet, through it all, its core principles survived. The vision first declared in 1776, that radical idea of a government of the people, now echoed across a country that was, at last, whole again. In the years following its great internal struggle, America embarked on the long, arduous process of healing. Across the nation, communities began to rebuild what had been lost. Steel rails stitched the country together, connecting distant states and fostering a new sense of unity. Industry boomed, bringing unprecedented prosperity, while the spread of education opened doors of opportunity for millions. The Union, once so fragile, was now growing stronger, its foundations reinforced by the hard-learned lessons of its past. The Constitution remained the bedrock, but its meaning expanded. The ideals of liberty and equality, once tragically limited, were now understood to belong to all. This growth wasn't just material, it was moral and intellectual. Freedmen's schools, a beacon of hope, opened across the South, offering education to those who had been denied it for so long. New immigrants arrived, carrying with them their languages, skills, and cultures, weaving new threads into the rich and complex tapestry of the Republic. The United States was evolving from just a place on a map into a powerful idea, shared belief that freedom could unite people from every corner of the earth and every walk of life. The late 1800s also ushered in a breathtaking age of invention. The telegraph, the railroad, and the steamship had already begun to shrink the world. Now, electricity and the telephone were poised to revolutionize communication and daily life, allowing knowledge to spread faster than ever before. But progress wasn't just measured in watts and wires. Reformers fought tirelessly for better schools, safer working conditions, and expanded civil rights. Writers and thinkers challenged old assumptions, dreaming of a more just and equitable society. Each generation stood on the shoulders of the one before, carrying forward the fundamental belief that for a democracy to thrive, it must constantly evolve. Looking back, from the first settlements to this new modern age, the American story was one of both triumph and tribulation. Every chapter, from the Revolution to Reconstruction, demanded reflection, compromise, and growth. The lessons were etched into the nation's soul. Liberty requires constant vigilance. Unity demands mutual understanding, and equality can never, ever be taken for granted. The founders had set powerful ideals in motion, but it was up to each new generation to strive to make those ideals a reality for all. Through immense hardship and unwavering hope, the country had learned that freedom is not a destination, but a continuous journey, one that demands patience, courage, and empathy. By the dawn of the 20th century, the United States was no longer a fragile experiment. It was a diverse, dynamic nation whose influence was beginning to stretch across oceans. Its people, from bustling cities to quiet towns, from newly built schools to humming factories, were linked by a shared purpose. They were all grappling with the same profound question at the heart of their nation: identity. how to live up to those three powerful opening words of their Constitution. We, the people. The American idea had proven so resilient because it didn't belong to a single region or class. It belonged to everyone who believed in the power of progress through cooperation and fairness. As a new century began, the United States faced the world with a unique blend of confidence and humility. It carried the heavy memory of its struggles, the wisdom gained from profound change, and the enduring hope that had sustained it from the very start. The journey from a collection of colonies to a unified republic was never a straight line, but it stood as a powerful testament to what can be achieved when a people choose to build rather than break, to listen rather than divide, and to dream beyond the immediate horizon. Years before, President Lincoln had offered words that now seemed to echo with renewed truth. The best way to predict your future is to create it. That, in essence, is the promise of American, a guarantee of perfection, but the endless possibility of creation. It is a nation forever learning, forever growing, and forever striving toward the ideals that first gave it life. From the first brave footsteps on a distant shore to the thriving cities of a new century, the story of the United States is one of endurance and renewal. The Republic, once an audacious experiment, became a lasting symbol of what free people can achieve when guided by principle and purpose. Generations would follow, each adding new chapters of challenge, discovery, and progress, yet always returning to that same foundational promise of liberty, equality, and hope. The light that rose over a new nation in 1776 still shines today, not because its journey is finished, but because it continues. The American story, born in courage, tested by conflict, and strengthened by compassion, remains a living testament to the idea that freedom, however imperfectly realized, can always be renewed. As the 19th century drew to a close, America was a nation busy building itself. For generations, the focus had been on expanding westward, laying down railroads, and forging a national identity. But while the United States was looking inward, the world around it was changing. The age of empire was in full swing, and global politics were being redrawn. It was only a matter of time before America would have to look beyond its own shores. That moment arrived in 1898. Tensions had been simmering between the United States and Spain, largely centered on the island of Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. The Cuban people were fighting for self-governance, and their struggle resonated with many Americans. Then, a U.S. naval vessel, the USS Maine, which was stationed in Havana Harbor, was mysteriously lost in a massive explosion. Across the country, emotions soared. Newspapers, fueled by what became known as yellow journalism, demanded action. Cries of "Remember the Maine" echoed from coast to coast, and the government soon decided to intervene in support of Cuba's path to independence. With authorization from Congress, President William McKinley prepared to act. What followed was one of the shortest international conflicts in American history. The fighting wasn't confined to the Caribbean. It spanned the globe. In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy, under the command of Commodore George Dewey, sailed into Manila Bay in the Philippines. In a swift and decisive battle, Dewey's modern fleet completely overwhelmed the aging Spanish squadron. This single encounter effectively established American control in the region and signaled a new era of naval power. Back in Cuba, the fight on the ground captured the nation's imagination. American volunteers, eager for adventure and driven by a sense of duty, joined the regular army forces. These campaigns became legendary. Among the most famous figures to emerge was a man named Theodore Roosevelt. He had resigned his post as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to lead a volunteer cavalry regiment known as the Rough Riders. Their charge up San Juan Hill became an iconic moment of the war, and Roosevelt's leadership and sheer determination earned him widespread public admiration, catapulting him onto the national political stage. By the end of the year, it was all over. Spain and the United States signed an agreement to end the fighting. The terms were transformative. Spain ceded control of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines to the United States, and Cuba, the island at the heart of the conflict, finally achieved its long-sought independence, though it would remain under American influence for years to come. The war, famously called a splendid little war by diplomat John Hay, had lasted just a few months. For the United States, 1898 was a profound turning point. The nation was no longer just an observer on the sidelines. It had become an active player on the global stage. The victory brought a wave of national pride and a sense of destiny. But it also raised difficult new questions. What responsibilities came with this newfound influence? How would America balance its founding ideals of freedom with the complex realities of governing overseas territories? These questions would follow the nation into the 20th century, shaping its identity and its role as a world power. The conflict was more than just a military event. It was the moment America stepped out into the world, forever changing its place in it, from 1901 to 1919. Imagine the United States at the turn of the 20th century. Cities are exploding with growth. Factories are churning out new wonders. And inventions like the telephone and automobile are rewriting the rules of daily life. The air is electric with possibility. But this rapid expansion cast long shadows. In the bustling cities, neighborhoods became dangerously overcrowded. In the booming industries, workers toiled in harsh, unsafe conditions for meager pay. The gap between the ultra-wealthy and the struggling poor was becoming a chasm. It was a nation bursting with progress, but also with problems. In response to these challenges, a new generation of leaders, thinkers, and everyday citizens rose up. They were called progressives, and they shared a powerful belief that government could and should be a force for good, working to serve all people fairly. They weren't just dreamers. They were doers, driven by a desire for honesty, efficiency, and compassion. They championed the idea that society wasn't fixed, could be improved, perfected even through reason, reform, and determined action. This wasn't just a political movement. It was a fundamental shift in the American mindset, a renewal of the nation's promise. The spirit of this new age found its champion in an unexpected president, Theodore Roosevelt. After President William McKinley's assassination, the dynamic and energetic Roosevelt took the helm. He wasn't one to sit on the sidelines. He famously took on the massive corporate trusts, earning the nickname Trust Buster for his efforts to ensure fair business practices and a level playing field. But his vision went further. Roosevelt was a passionate conservationist. He saw the nation's breathtaking wilderness not as something to be exploited, but as a treasure to be preserved. Under his leadership, the government protected millions of acres of land, establishing national parks and forests for all future generations to enjoy. His presidency sent a clear message: the government would now actively work for the public good. This wave of reform wasn't just happening in Washington. It was sweeping through towns and cities all across America. Local governments began to clean up corruption, making elections fairer and city services, like sanitation and public health, better for everyone. Out of the factories and mines, workers began to organize, demanding safer conditions, reasonable hours, and a living wage. Their strikes and protests were a powerful call for justice. At the same time, one of the most significant movements in American history was gaining unstoppable momentum: the fight for women's suffrage. Women organized, marched, and courageously demanded the right to vote, challenging the very definition of American democracy and pushing the nation toward a more inclusive future. New voices amplified the call for change. Muckraking journalists, as they were called, published explosive articles and books, exposing the hidden corruption in politics and the brutal realities of urban poverty and industrial labor. Their words shocked the conscience of the nation and fueled the demand for reform. Innovators in fields like education and public health developed new systems and ideas that transformed millions of lives, creating better schools and healthier communities. From the halls of power to the streets of the inner city, each reformer, whether a president, a journalist, a labor leader, or a suffragist, contributed a vital piece to the puzzle, helping to build a more just and balanced society. By the time Woodrow Wilson entered the White House, progressivism was no longer a radical idea. It was the defining spirit of the age. Landmark legislation was passed, fundamentally changing the relationship between government, business, and the American people. New laws were created to regulate banking, protect consumers from unsafe products, and break up monopolies. America was not just becoming more modern in its technology and industry. It was becoming more mindful of its founding values of fairness and opportunity for all. The progressive era was a testament to the resilience of American democracy. It proved that a nation could confront its deepest problems: inequality, corruption, and injustice, and reform itself from within. It was a period of profound renewal, a time when the American promise felt more tangible and within reach for more people than ever before. But even as the nation was reshaping itself, the world beyond its borders was growing more turbulent. New tensions were simmering in Europe, storm clouds gathering on the horizon. These distant conflicts would soon test America's newfound confidence and pull it onto the world stage. Changing the course of history forever. Imagine it's the summer of 1914, far across the Atlantic. In the heart of Europe, a single event triggers a catastrophic chain reaction. Nations that had promised to protect each other are now calling in those promises. Armies are on the move, and a conflict that will be called the Great War begins to spread like wildfire. But here, in the United States, it all feels very distant. Most Americans see it as Europe's problem, a struggle that has little to do with their lives. The nation officially declares neutrality, standing apart from the growing chaos. But you can't build a wall around a global economy. As the years tick by, staying neutral becomes harder and harder. American ships are caught in the crossfire. Trade is disrupted, and heart-wrenching stories of the war's human cost fill the newspapers. The conflict that once seemed so far away is now directly impacting American lives and the nation's sense of security. Slowly but surely, public opinion begins to shift. The question is no longer if America should get involved, but when by 1917, the moment arrives. President Woodrow Wilson stands before Congress and delivers a powerful message. He declares that this is not just a war over territory, but a fight for ideals. He famously says that the world must be made safe for democracy. With that, Congress votes to declare war, and the United States officially enters the global conflict. It's a massive undertaking. A wave of patriotism sweeps the nation as millions of young men from every walk of life, from bustling city streets to quiet farm towns, enlist to become soldiers. They are joined by nurses, engineers, and countless volunteers, all ready to contribute to the war effort. Soon, American ships are crossing the Atlantic, carrying not just soldiers and supplies, but a renewed spirit of determination to the exhausted Allied forces. For years, the war had been a brutal stalemate, defined by the mud and misery of trench warfare. The arrival of fresh, energetic American troops, known as doughboys, gives the Allies a much-needed boost. Their presence on the Western Front helps to turn the tide of the war. Finally, after unimaginable hardship and loss on all sides, an armistice is signed in the fall of 1918. The guns fall silent. The Great War is over. The world breathes a collective sigh of relief, but it's a relief mixed with profound grief. The world has been changed forever. In the aftermath, President Wilson travels to Europe with a bold vision for a lasting peace. He proposes his famous 14 points, a blueprint designed to prevent such a devastating war from ever happening again. He advocates for open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, and, most importantly, the creation of a League of Nations and international body where countries could resolve disputes peacefully. It's a revolutionary idea, a hope for a new world order built on cooperation instead of conflict. But back home, the mood is different. The war has taken its toll, and many Americans are tired of international entanglements. They want to return to a sense of normalcy and focus on their own country. A heated debate takes place in the US Senate, which ultimately refuses to ratify the treaty and join the League of Nations. America turns inward again, stepping back from the global leadership role it had just begun to assume. The nation focuses on rebuilding and recovery. Even so, the legacy of the Great War was undeniable. It had demonstrated the terrifying power of modern industrial warfare and revealed just how interconnected the world had become. It also showed the immense influence America could have on the world stage, even if it chose not to use it. As the world cautiously searched for a new balance, a new decade was dawning. The Roaring Twenties were just around the corner, promising a future that was bright, loud, and full of change. But it would also carry the shadows of the war that had just ended. The guns of the Great War had finally fallen silent, and the world let out a collective sigh of relief. For the United States, the 1920s began with an incredible burst of optimism. It was an age of speed, rhythm, and profound change. Across the country, cities scraped the sky with new towers. Factory smokestacks billowed with productivity, and a new kind of electric energy filled the air. This was a decade defined by confidence. Think about it. Automobiles, once a luxury for the wealthy, started rolling off assembly lines by the thousands, putting the dream of the open road within reach for millions. These cars didn't just shrink distances. They expanded horizons and offered a new sense of freedom. At the same time, the radio became the heart of the American home. For the first time, voices, music, and news could travel through the air, connecting a vast and diverse nation in a way that had never been possible before. And what was the soundtrack to this era? Jazz. It was vibrant, unpredictable, and alive, the perfect score for an age that worshipped innovation and breaking free from the past. In sprawling cities like New York and Chicago, the nights came alive. Dance halls, grand theaters, and smoky clubs became the epicenters of a new social world, where people cast off the stiff formalities of the Victorian era. A powerful symbol of this new spirit was the flapper. Young women, empowered by the recent victory of winning the right to vote, embraced their independence. They expressed this newfound freedom through daring fashion, new career opportunities, and a vibrant artistic scene. The flapper was modern, bold, and utterly unapologetic, a true icon of the age. But the 1920s wasn't just about parties and fast cars. It was a time of a profound cultural awakening. The Harlem Renaissance, centered in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City, saw an explosion of creative genius. African American writers, musicians, poets, and artists brought their powerful stories of identity, pride, and struggle to the national stage. Figures like Langston Hughes and Louis Armstrong didn't just create beautiful art. They fundamentally reshaped American culture, and their influence is still felt powerfully today. However, beneath all the glittering celebration, deep divisions were beginning to show. While the cities boomed, many rural farmers faced desperate times as crop prices plummeted after the war. The promise of the American dream wasn't extended to everyone. Immigrants and minority groups continued to face widespread prejudice and discrimination. A growing tension simmered between the old, traditional ways of life and the new, fast-paced, modern ideas that were taking hold in the cities. The biggest illusion of the era was the belief in endless prosperity, fueled by wild speculation on the stock market. It seemed like anyone could get rich. Money felt easy, fortunes were made overnight, and the nation's confidence soared to irrational heights. But like any bubble, it was fragile. Unseen cracks were forming deep beneath the glittering surface of the economy, cracks that almost no one wanted to see. As the decade sped towards its end, the vibrant music of the Jazz Age began to quiet down. Then, in the fateful month of October 1929, the New York Stock Exchange collapsed, and with it, the dreams of countless Americans shattered into pieces. An era that had been defined by its boundless exuberance and unshakable confidence ended in a cloud of uncertainty and fear. The Roaring Twenties had given America its first real taste of modern life, dynamic, restless, and full of incredible possibility. But the hard lessons learned from its dramatic rise and fall would forge the strength and resilience of the generation that had to face the Great Depression that followed. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire decade of roaring prosperity suddenly goes silent? The year is 1929. The music stops, the parties end, and the American dream seems to vanish overnight. The stock market crash wasn't just a financial headline. It was the opening chapter of a national struggle that would redefine America. Imagine bustling factories, falling quiet, their gates locked. Picture fertile farms, turning to barren dust, and city streets, once filled with ambition, now lined with despair. This was the Great Depression. Millions of Americans lost everything: their jobs, their life savings, and for so many, their homes. You'd see families packing up their few belongings, traveling endlessly in search of any work they could find. Long lines snaked outside soup kitchens, a stark symbol of a nation brought to its knees. In the Great Plains, immense dust storms, the infamous Dust Bowl, choked the sky and forced entire communities to abandon the only homes they'd ever known. But even in the darkest of times, the American spirit is a stubborn thing. This was a time of immense hardship, yes, but it was also a time of incredible endurance. Neighbors looked out for one another, sharing what little they had. Small towns pooled their resources, proving that community was more than just a word. The hope for a better future, though faint, never truly died out. It flickered like a candle in the wind, refusing to be extinguished. Then, in 1933, a new voice of hope emerged. Franklin D. Roosevelt took the oath of office with a promise of bold, decisive action. In his inaugural address, he delivered a line that would echo through history. "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." For a nation starved of confidence, these words were a lifeline. Roosevelt's response was the New Deal, a groundbreaking series of programs designed to tackle the crisis head-on. The goal was simple but audacious: stabilize the economy, get people back to work, and restore faith in the country. Suddenly, a wave of activity swept across the nation. New government agencies put millions of Americans to work. They built the bridges we still drive over, the schools our children attend, and the national parks we cherish. These weren't just jobs. They were projects that would serve the nation for generations. Farmers received aid to reclaim their land from the dust, and new laws were passed to reform the banking system, rebuilding the trust that had been so completely shattered. For the first time, the government took an active, direct role in the daily lives of its citizens, creating social safety nets that have lasted to this day. And it wasn't just about infrastructure. Artists, writers, and photographers were hired to capture the era, preserving the faces and stories of resilience that defined the American experience during this trying time. Slowly but surely, the country began to heal. The sight of newly paved roads, massive dams rising from riverbeds, and construction crews humming with activity became powerful symbols of recovery. Confidence didn't return in a flash, but it grew steadily, built on the foundations of hard work, a renewed sense of unity, and a shared hope for the future. By the late 1930s, the green shoots of progress were visible across the nation. The worst of the Depression was over, but as America looked up from its own struggles, it saw a world growing restless once more. A new storm was gathering on the horizon, and the nation would soon face challenges on a global scale, unlike anything it had ever known before. Imagine that 1930s, the world was quietly trying to heal from one great war, but dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. In Europe and Asia, aggressive ambitions were threatening to shatter the fragile peace. While many Americans hoped to remain separate from these overseas struggles, the world was shrinking fast. As nations fell one by one, the idea of standing aside became harder and harder to justify. The United States was watching, waiting, and wrestling with its role in a world on the brink. Then came a day that would live in infamy. In December 1941, a shocking attack on a U.S. naval base unified the nation in a single, heart-stopping moment. President Franklin D. Roosevelt spoke to a stunned country, not with panic but with a voice of calm resolve. America was no longer on the sidelines. It was time to act. What followed was an incredible national effort. Overnight, factories that once made cars and appliances started churning out planes, ships, and tanks. Millions of men and women answered the call to serve, heading off to distant lands. And back home, an army of civilians worked tirelessly in factories and on farms. Women stepped into roles they'd never held before, shattering old stereotypes and proving their indispensable strength and skill. Every corner of the country, from small towns to big cities, pitched in. This wasn't just a war fought by soldiers. It was a war fought by an entire nation, united in purpose. Across the vast oceans, American forces joined their allies in a global struggle. The fight spanned from the deserts of North Africa to the islands of the Pacific. The road to victory was brutal and heartbreakingly long. But, slowly, through incredible courage, strategic cooperation, and constant innovation, the tide began to turn in favor of the Allies. The pivotal moment arrived in 1944. A massive, daring invasion was launched across the English Channel D-Day. This monumental operation marked the beginning of the end, opening the path to liberate Europe from tyranny. Less than a year later, victory was declared in Europe. But the war wasn't over. In the Pacific, the fighting raged on until the world was forced to witness the terrifying power of a new and devastating technology, bringing the conflict to a final, dramatic close. When the war finally ended in 1945, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the cost was immense, and the experience had changed everything. The United States emerged not just as a victor, but as a global leader, its destiny now intertwined with the rest of the world. The war taught hard lessons about the price of freedom and the power of nations working together. From the ashes of this conflict, new alliances and institutions were born, all with the goal of preventing such a catastrophe from ever happening again. But even as the world celebrated peace, new tensions were already simmering, hinting at a very different kind of struggle that was yet to come. Imagine a world holding its breath. The smoke of World War II has cleared, but a new, chilling silence falls over the globe. Two giants, once allies against a common enemy, now stand on opposite sides of a new divide. This is the story of the Cold War, a battle not of armies but of ideas, pitting the United States against the Soviet Union. It was a war of whispers and shadows, a high-stakes chess match played across the entire planet. One side championed democracy and freedom. The other, a world under centralized control. This wasn't just a rivalry. It was a struggle for the future of humanity itself. Across Europe, an invisible line was drawn. Winston Churchill called it the Iron Curtain. To the West, nations rebuilt with American help, embracing freedom and prosperity. To the East, countries fell under Soviet influence, their futures dictated from Moscow. The city of Berlin became the heart of this division, a flashpoint of tension. When the Soviets blockaded West Berlin, cutting off food and supplies, the world watched in fear. But America and its allies responded not with tanks, but with planes. The Berlin airlift was a monumental feat of courage and logistics, as pilots flew around the clock, delivering hope from the skies. It was a powerful statement. Freedom would not be starved into submission. This struggle soon went global, as new nations in Asia and Africa were pressured to choose a side, turning local conflicts into international crises. Back home in America, life was a strange mix of optimism and anxiety. Families were buying new homes in the suburbs and marveling at the wonders of television. But there was an undercurrent of fear. School kids practiced duck and cover drills, a constant reminder of the nuclear threat looming over their heads. This fear also fueled an incredible burst of innovation. The jet engine, the computer, and countless other technologies were developed at a breakneck pace. Then, in 1957, a beeping sphere orbited the Earth. Sputnik, the Soviet satellite, was a shock to the system, a wake-up call that America was falling behind. The response? President Kennedy's audacious challenge to put a man on the moon before the decade was out. The space race was on, transforming science, education, and the very limits of what we thought was possible. The 1960s were a roller coaster of tension. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the very brink of nuclear annihilation. A terrifying standoff that forced both superpowers to step back and reevaluate. But through the fear, there were also glimmers of hope and moments of breathtaking achievement. In 1969, as hundreds of millions watched on their TVs, Neil Armstrong took one small step for a man. One giant leap for mankind. The moon landing wasn't just an American victory in the space race. It was a victory for the human spirit, a symbol of what we could achieve when we aimed for the stars instead of at each other. This monumental event began to shift the dynamic. Slowly, cautiously, the focus moved from confrontation to communication. As leaders started the long, difficult process of building trust and reducing their massive nuclear arsenals. By the late 1980s, the ground began to shift beneath the foundations of the Eastern Bloc. Calls for freedom grew louder, echoing from Poland to Hungary and beyond. Then came the moment that symbolized the end of an era. On a cold November night in 1989, the Berlin Wall, that brutal concrete scar that had divided a city and a continent for decades, was breached. People flooded through, chipping away at the wall with hammers and hands, tearing down the most potent symbol of the Cold War. The conflict ended not with a bang, but with the joyful cries of reunited families and the crumbling of an empire. For nearly 50 years, the United States had walked a tightrope, balancing immense power with strategic patience. The end of the Cold War ushered in a new era of hope, opening the door to a world where cooperation could finally triumph over conflict. While the Cold War raged on the world stage, a different kind of war was being fought right here at home. This was a battle for the very soul of America, a struggle to make the nation live up to its founding promise of freedom and equality for all. For far too long, that promise had been a distant dream for millions of its citizens. The mid-20th century, however, was about to change everything. After World War II, veterans returned home, ready to enjoy the freedoms they had fought so hard to defend. But for African Americans, especially in the South, and for other marginalized communities, the harsh reality of segregation and discrimination hadn't changed. Jim Crow laws dictated where they could live, work, and even drink water. The injustice was suffocating, but the desire for change was growing stronger every day. The time for silent suffering was over. The call for justice was about to become a roar. From the quiet streets of small towns to the bustling avenues of major cities, a powerful movement began to take shape. It wasn't led by generals or politicians, but by ordinary people, students, parents, ministers, and factory workers. They chose dignity over despair and peace over violence. They organized marches, staged sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, and boycotted businesses that treated them as second-class citizens. Their demand was simple, yet profound: full equality under the law. At the heart of this movement stood a man whose words would echo through history: Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance gave the movement its moral compass and its unifying strength. He taught that the goal was not to defeat an enemy, but to win them over with love and understanding. Dr. King's powerful speeches, filled with hope and determination, didn't just inspire a nation. They inspired the entire world. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Landmark legal victories, like the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education, declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional. The brave actions of peaceful protesters, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the March on Washington, captured the nation's attention. Televisions broadcast the struggle into living rooms across the country, making it impossible for anyone to ignore the fight for justice. The courage of these demonstrators began to stir the conscience of America. This growing pressure led to monumental change. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, a groundbreaking piece of legislation that outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Just 1 year later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, dismantling the barriers that had prevented so many African Americans from exercising their fundamental right to vote. These laws didn't erase prejudice overnight, but they marked an irreversible turning point in the American story. The spirit of the civil rights movement sparked a fire that spread across society. The 1960s saw the rise of powerful movements for women's rights, farm workers' rights, and environmental protection. Each group, inspired by the fight for racial equality, expanded the definition of freedom and justice. It was a time of intense debate and social upheaval, but also of incredible creativity. Music, art, and literature became the voice of a new generation, challenging old norms and dreaming of a more inclusive and compassionate world. By the dawn of the 1970s, the landscape of America had been fundamentally reshaped. The civil rights movement had proven that ordinary people, united by faith and a common purpose, could move mountains. The work was far from over, and the struggle for true equality continues to this day. But a new foundation had been laid, built on the courage and sacrifice of those who dared to demand a better future. The story of this era is a powerful reminder that progress in America has often come not from the top down, but from the ground up. It's a testament to the power of conscience, courage, and the simple belief that real change begins when people stand together for what is right. As the post-war generation came of age in the 1970s, they inherited a United States that was both immensely powerful and deeply restless. The boundless optimism of previous decades started to fade, replaced by a period of national reflection. Americans began to ask themselves a tough question: what does progress truly mean? The 70s kicked off with a wave of uncertainty. The economy was hit hard by rising energy costs, stubborn inflation, and a changing global marketplace. This new reality tested the nation's confidence. At the same time, political scandals and complex foreign policy issues shook public trust in the government. But even in these trying times, America's democratic institutions proved their resilience, demonstrating a remarkable ability to self-correct and endure. As the decade unfolded, a powerful new movement took root: environmentalism. A growing awareness about protecting our planet for future generations swept the nation. The very first Earth Day in 1970 was a pivotal moment, showing that collective concern could spark real, lasting change. Landmark laws were passed to clean our air and water, and environmental stewardship became a core part of the American identity. Simultaneously, an incredible technological revolution was quietly beginning. Computers, which once filled entire rooms, were shrinking down to a size that could fit on a desk. This innovation transformed business, science, and everyday life, paving the way for the digital age we know today. American inventors and entrepreneurs were at the forefront, laying the groundwork for the information explosion that would define the coming decades. Entering the 1980s, the United States found a renewed sense of confidence and global influence. The economy began to bounce back, technological progress accelerated, and a spirit of individual opportunity defined the era. Music, movies, and television connected the country in new and exciting ways, celebrating both its incredible diversity and its boundless creativity. This was the decade of big hair, bold fashion, and even bigger ideas. On the world stage, the ground was shifting once again. While the Cold War's tensions lingered, new avenues for diplomacy and communication started to open up. American leadership played a key role in easing old divisions, guided by a principle of peace through strength and understanding through dialogue. It was a delicate balance of competition and cooperation, aimed at building a more stable world. Then, in the late 1980s, a powerful wind of change swept across the globe. Walls that had divided nations and families for generations began to crack and fall. The moment the Berlin Wall came down in 1989 was more than just the end of an era. It was a symbol of hope and the dawn of a new age of global cooperation. The world watched, breathless, as history unfolded. By the 1990s, the Cold War was officially over. The United States emerged as the world's leading economic and cultural force, a nation celebrated for its innovation, resilience, and unwavering belief in freedom. But with this new status came new challenges. How could America lead responsibly in a world no longer defined by ideological conflict? How could it use its influence to foster peace and collaboration, not rivalry? This period, from the 70s to the 90s, was an era of fascinating contradictions. America was prosperous, yet questioning, confident, yet reflective. It was a time of expansion, not of territory, but of ideas. As the 20th century drew to a close, the nation stood once again at a historic turning point, looking back with pride at its journey and forward with hope for the new millennium. As the new millennium dawned, the United States was entering an era of unprecedented transformation. The world felt smaller, more connected through technology, travel, and instant communication. Yet, this new age would bring complexities and uncertainties that would test the nation like never before. The initial optimism of a new century was about to face a challenge that would redefine a generation. In September 2001, tragedy struck the heart of the nation. Coordinated acts of violence claimed thousands of lives, shattering the country's sense of security. In that profound moment of grief and loss, something remarkable happened. The country unified with a powerful resolve. People from all walks of life extended hands to one another, proving that compassion and solidarity could rise above fear. This event left an indelible mark on the American identity and reshaped its role on the global stage. The years that followed were marked by new responsibilities abroad and vigorous debates at home. America embarked on an era of global engagement that tested its leadership and its core ideals. Through these periods of hardship and uncertainty, the nation continually sought a delicate balance between ensuring security and preserving freedom, between projecting strength and fostering understanding. Simultaneously, a technological revolution was accelerating at a breathtaking pace. The explosion of the Internet fundamentally changed how we learn, work, and connect. Social media platforms linked billions of people, amplifying voices and creating new communities. But this digital frontier also introduced new challenges related to truth, trust, and social unity. We were building a new world online, one filled with both boundless opportunities and unforeseen risks. The early 21st century also brought significant economic shifts. The Great Recession of 2008 tested the resilience of families and businesses across the country. But out of that challenge, innovation and perseverance sparked a recovery. New industries, powered by renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology, began to reshape the economic landscape. Meanwhile, a new golden age of space exploration was launched, fueled by exciting collaborations between public agencies and private enterprise. This period also saw a deepening of social awareness. Crucial conversations about equality, representation, and justice moved from the margins to the center of our national life. A rich diversity of voices began to shape public discourse, as both older and younger generations debated and defined what progress should mean in the modern era. In 2020, the world faced another monumental trial, a global health crisis that impacted every community and economy on the planet. And once again, Americans demonstrated their resilience through cooperation, adaptation, and a trust in science. The spirit of innovation and empathy shone through the adversity. As the decade progressed, transformative technologies from electric vehicles to advanced digital communication and medical breakthroughs continued to redefine what was possible and offer new hope for our collective well-being. Today, the United States stands at another pivotal moment. Its strength is measured not just by its economy or its global influence, but by its capacity to adapt, lead, and inspire. The questions we face are immense. How do we protect our planet? How do we strengthen our communities? And how do we preserve freedom in this rapidly changing world? Through every triumph and every trial, one truth holds firm. The nation's greatest strength has always been its people. Every challenge overcome, every new idea pursued, and every dream imagined adds another verse to the ongoing story of America's story that is still being written by all of us every single day. From the first colonies on the Atlantic coast to the farthest reaches of space, the story of the United States has always been one of endurance, reinvention, and hope. Across centuries, this nation has faced moments of trial and triumph, of progress and reflection, with each one shaping the next chapter in its unfinished journey. It's a story that belongs to all of us. A narrative written not just in history books, but in the lives and dreams of every person who has called this land home. Today, America stands as a nation both young and old. It's youthful in its constant energy for change, yet seasoned by experience. Its vast landscapes, bustling cities, and diverse people tell a story of creativity and incredible perseverance. Every generation, from the founders to our own, has been asked the same fundamental question: how do we uphold the ideals of liberty, equality, and opportunity in a world that is always changing? How do we live up to the promise that sparked a revolution? The answer, time and again, has been found in the same place, within its people. It's found in the hands of farmers tilling the soil, in the minds of engineers building bridges to the future, in the hearts of teachers shaping the next generation, and in the vision of artists and dreamers who dare to imagine a better world. It's the shared belief that progress is not simply given to us. It's earned through hard work, dedication, and the strength of unity. This is the bedrock of the American spirit. And that spirit isn't about being perfect. It's never been about an unflawed history. It's about persistence. It's the willingness to stand up, dust ourselves off, and try again. It's the courage to learn from our mistakes, and to see challenges not as insurmountable obstacles, but as invitations to grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. This resilience is woven into the very fabric of the nation's identity, a testament to the enduring power of hope. The United States has left an indelible mark on science, art, and global culture. Its achievements, from landing on the moon to decoding the human genome, reflect a deep, insatiable desire to explore, to understand, and to connect with the world around us. Yet, its greatest and most powerful legacy remains its founding idea, that a free people, working together in common cause, can and will shape their own destiny. This radical notion continues to echo across the globe, as we face the new, complex challenges of our time, from transformative technology to a changing climate, from fostering global cooperation to understanding our own identities. The nation's promise endures. The same three words that ignited this great experiment continue to guide it forward. We, the people. It's a reminder that the power has always resided with us, in our collective will and shared responsibility. The American story is far from finished. It's being written at this very moment, in classrooms where curiosity is sparked, in communities where neighbors help neighbors, and in countless acts of compassion and creativity that often go unseen. Each generation adds its own unique verse to the ongoing song of democracy, renewing its melody for those who will follow. It is a living, breathing narrative, and we are all its authors. And as history continues to unfold, one truth remains clearer than ever. The spirit that built this nation, old, curious, and incredibly resilient, still burns brightly today. It is the light that connects our past to our future, a beacon reminding not only a country, but the entire world, that the dream of freedom, though often tested, will always endure through the conviction of those who believe in it. This is the American spirit, a journey without end, a promise without borders, and a hope that continues to inspire. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content. It helps us continue to share these important narratives. We'll see you next time.